I thought I knew Frieren. We all did. The stoic elf mage who outlived her human companions, wandering through centuries with that same vacant expression, collecting spells like souvenirs from a life too long to comprehend. But 3 months ago, I stumbled across something that shattered everything I believed about this character. And honestly, it's kept me awake at night ever since. You see, most people watch Frieren and think they're getting a beautiful story about grief, time, and what it means to form connections when you're essentially immortal. Surface-level stuff. Emotional, sure, but predictable. The kind of narrative that makes you cry into your cereal while thinking about mortality and friendship. I was one of those people. I was so wrong it hurts. The revelation started with something small. A single frame that lasted less than 2 seconds in episode 14. Most viewers probably blinked and missed it entirely. I only caught it because I was making screenshots for a completely different theory about magic systems. There, hidden in the background of what seemed like an innocent flashback, was a detail that made my blood run cold. But before I tell you what I found, you need to understand something crucial about how storytelling works in anime. The best creators don't just tell you a story, they hide another story underneath. They plant seeds so deep that when they finally bloom, you realize you've been watching something completely different from the very beginning. Frieren isn't just guilty of this technique. It's the most elaborate example I've ever encountered. Think about it. When did you first start trusting Frieren's perspective? Probably from episode 1, right? She's our narrator, our window into this world. We see everything through her ancient, supposedly wise eyes. She tells us about the passage of time, about human frailty, about the weight of memories. And we believe her. Why wouldn't we? Here's where it gets disturbing. That frame I mentioned? It shows a book. Just a regular book on a shelf during a monastery scene. The title is barely visible, written in the background script that most viewers assume is gibberish. But it's not gibberish. When you translate it properly, using the linguistic system established in earlier episodes, it reads, Chronicles of the Great Deception, Volume 7. Volume 7. Of a series about deception. In a monastery scene that's supposedly about Frieren learning human customs and religion. I spent weeks dismissing this as an Easter egg, maybe a joke from the animators. But then I started looking closer at other background details, street signs, posters on walls, text on magical artifacts, and slowly, horrifyingly, a pattern emerged that changed everything I thought I knew about this story. The language scattered throughout the background isn't random world building. It's a secondary narrative. A hidden story running parallel to what we're seeing on screen. And this secondary story reveals that Frieren isn't who she claims to be. Not even close. Remember how she always seems to know exactly which spells to collect? How she somehow appears at precisely the right historical moments? How she manages to outlive not just her original party members, but countless other companions across centuries, always maintaining that same detached emotional state? Most fans explain this as elvish longevity, creating natural emotional distance. It's a reasonable interpretation. It's also completely wrong. The background text tells a different story entirely. It speaks of the Wanderer, an entity that appears throughout history, always at crucial moments, always collecting something. Not spells, information, memories, power. The texts describe rituals, sacrifices, and a plan that spans millennia. They mention vessels and harvesting, and something called the Final Collection. You know what's terrifying? When you map out Frieren's historical appearances based on the background lore, they don't correspond to random wandering. They correspond to specific historical disasters, kingdoms falling, heroes dying, magic users disappearing. She's not wandering aimlessly through history. She's orchestrating it. But here's where the rabbit hole gets deeper. Those touching moments where Frieren learns to understand human emotions, where she slowly opens up and begins to value her connections with mortals. The background narrative suggests these aren't character growth moments, they're data collection. She's not learning to love, she's learning to manipulate love. Think about her relationship with Himmel, the way she barely seemed to notice his feelings until after he died. Most viewers see this as elvish emotional disconnect, a tragic failure to recognize love until it's too late. But what if it's the opposite? What if she recognized it perfectly, cataloged it completely, and then used his death as an emotional weapon against herself to perfect her understanding of human grief? The monastery texts mention something called emotional mapping, the process of experiencing and documenting human feelings, not to understand them, but to weaponize them, to create perfect replicas that can be deployed strategically. Every tear Frieren sheds, every moment of vulnerability, every instance where she seems to finally grasp human connection. What if these are all calculated performances based on her centuries of data collection? What if the real Frieren is something else entirely? Something that sees human emotion as a tool to be mastered rather than an experience to be cherished? I know how this sounds. Like conspiracy theory nonsense. Like someone who's spent too much time analyzing background details instead of enjoying the story. But I kept digging, and the evidence kept mounting. Character names that translate to words like deception and harvest. Timeline inconsistencies that only make sense if Frieren has been actively altering historical records. Magical techniques that seem less like spell collection and more like soul manipulation. The most damning piece came from episode 23. There's a scene where Frieren examines an ancient magical artifact, something supposedly left behind by previous mages. She touches it, closes her eyes, and we see what appears to be a memory of its previous owner. Standard magical archaeology, right? But look at her expression when she thinks no one is watching. Look at her face in the split second before she composes herself. That's not the face of someone experiencing a random magical memory. That's the face of someone accessing files. Someone reviewing data they've personally collected. The artifact wasn't left behind by some ancient mage. She created it. She stored those memories herself. The entire scene is Frieren accessing her own database of human experiences, carefully curated over centuries of manipulation and collection. And if that's true, if Frieren has been systematically harvesting human experiences and emotions for some unknowable purpose, then everything we think we know about her story is a lie. The grief, the growth, the touching journey toward understanding humanity. It's all performance art. It's all part of something bigger and darker than we ever imagined. The question isn't whether Frieren is learning to be more human. The question is, what is she planning to do with all that human data she's collected? What comes after the final collection? We're about to find out.